Of all modern methods of execution, the electric chair is what makes me most uneasy. It's not because it's fast, not because it's humane as they used to claim, but precisely because of the lies built around it. From the 1880s, when Thomas Edison and George Westinghouse were involved in the War of the Currents, the electric chair was born not to reduce the suffering of death row inmates, but to prove that the alternating current of their commercial rival was more dangerous. It's a business game, disguised under the guise of justice. The U.S. justice system has always stated that the death penalty is not intended to torture, but is merely a means of ending a life that has committed a serious crime. But when you hear the story of John Lewis Evans III, you'll wonder if the line between justice and torture truly exists. On April 22, 1983, Evans was pulled from his death row cell and led into a cramped, suffocating room. One wall had a large bay window covered by a curtain, making him feel like he was trapped in an ancient crypt. Only the warm and bright fluorescent lights reminded him that this was not a tomb, but the place where he would witness his final moments. The night before, Evans was granted one last privilege before his miserable existence was extinguished, a final meal of his choosing. He chose surf and turf, a delicious tender steak with shrimp and fries, not a bad choice compared to others, like the guy who asked for a lump of dirt, or the ordinary person who just wanted a fried bologna sandwich and orange juice. Evans is the type of person who likes to appear calm. He built a mask of someone who doesn't care about life, someone who tends to do everything wrong. But on that April day in 1983, the mask began to crack, revealing a truly frightened person facing the Creator. His execution device is called Yellow Mama. It was painted with an uncomfortably bright, glaring gold layer. For many prisoners, that yellow color was certainly a mockery. Look at this yellow color, which for most people symbolizes sunshine or spring flowers, but you don't deserve that symbol. For you, this gold is the color of sparks that can burst into a large flame while you writhe waiting for your last breath. The irony of Yellow Mama is that it was built by a prisoner himself. Ed Mason, serving a 60-year sentence for grand larceny, was a master carpenter before his arrest. Mason is like a vampire who betrayed his own kind to become a vampire hunter. He built this death machine himself. The official model was completed in 1927. The story of the bright yellow paint color is actually quite vague. It was simply one of the few paint colors available to prisoners behind bars. Behind the curtain of the execution chamber, Evans was being prepared. This entire process certainly didn't help him worry less. Your head was shaved clean before you entered. A skull-shaped electrode is attached to the head. Several other electrodes are moistened with conductive gel and placed in various locations on the leg. Then came the waiting game. Every death row inmate clings to a vain hope that they will be saved by a last-minute stay of execution. Can you imagine the thrill of watching the clock hands, waiting for a phone call that never comes? The erratic increase and decrease of adrenaline levels makes you nauseous. Suspensions of execution were a rare phenomenon back then, unlike today. Evans's heart surely sank when no last-minute savior appeared. When the curtain was removed from the glass, it revealed a small group of observers, possibly including one or two journalists. They stared intently at the stiff expression of the dying man. That was a stark contrast to the man they met in court. Evans essentially admitted to the jury that he deserved to be executed. In fact, he threatened to kill each and every one of them if they didn't decide to execute him. He declared that he could never be rehabilitated and would always be a threat to society. This is perhaps the desperate plea of a man who would rather choose death than a life behind bars. As observers looked at his face while he was connected to Yellow Mama, they surely wondered if he now regretted his words. A lightly dampened sponge was placed on Evans's head. He was granted the final rite and the opportunity to say goodbye. His words might shock at least a few people. I have no ill will toward anyone. I don't hate anyone. A hood was placed over his head. This action certainly sent a surge of adrenaline and ice through his veins, an action that made his reality undeniable. At exactly 8:20 p.m., the first electric shock of 1900 volts was passed through his body, lasting for 30 seconds. Unfortunately, too much time has passed since the sponge under Evans's helmet was soaked in salt water. It was almost withered. Furthermore, the electrodes on his legs didn't contain enough conductive gel. These are seemingly minor technical details, but in the context of electrocution, they are the line between a quick death and a prolonged torture. Observers were overwhelmed by the thick stench of burning hair and flesh. It's a bit sweet, but mixed with the toxic smell of melting plastic. Evans's head was shaved bald, but fine hairs still covered his entire body, melting down to the pores. Then, flames suddenly erupted above his head, dancing down to his feet, sometimes skipping over large areas like a strange whirlwind. He twitched and struggled before collapsing, an action that seemed to foreshadow death. His hands curled into stiff fists, as if his knuckles were being boiled, losing moisture, causing them to shrink like a dry, scorched autumn leaf. That's the position they will eventually freeze in death. But not yet. The hood on his head seemed to have holes at the top, where a cascade of sparks erupted in chaotic waves. This man accidentally became a 4th of July fireworks display, a living firework. After a period of waiting, the two doctors carefully examined Evans and revealed the horrifying truth. He was still alive. In forensic medicine, there's a principle called signs of life, biological indicators that cannot be disguised. The heartbeat is weak but still present. The slight movements of the chest. The pupils also react to light. Everything indicates that Evans hasn't left this world, even though his body was partially burned. Doctors, trained to save lives, now have to confirm that they need to continue killing a human being. It was an ethical paradox that no one in the room could escape. The partially burned electrodes were reattached to his legs, and a second shock was administered. A thick gray cloud of smoke filled the air. More sparks and intense flames erupted on his hood and legs. Now, the smell of melting clothes is spreading from the execution chamber. Spectators were forced to cover their noses with their shirts, and some had to turn away. In the history of U.S. executions, there have been similar cases. In 1946, 17-year-old Willie Francis survived the first attempt and cried out, "Stop! I'm not dead yet." The Supreme Court subsequently ruled that the second execution did not violate the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. A year later, the boy was executed again. 10 seconds after the second shock, the smell of roasting meat rose from Evans's body, the smell of his own flesh being cooked. "I'm being fried like breakfast sausage." The smell was a bit stronger than the usual smoky aroma of grilled ribs and burger buns, and it was mixed with a slight metallic tang, perhaps a product of his still living system releasing inflammatory proteins that caused capillaries to leak blood. Because the blood was too close to the surface, it was quickly consumed by heat and fire. After another period of waiting, Evans was checked again. To their disappointment, he was still breathing. His battered heart still beats. A pardon request from the governor was submitted due to his unusual suffering. It turns out that even the coldest killers, when subjected to a prolonged and torturous frying, are difficult for many people to witness. To me, this is ridiculous. This man wants nothing more than to die at this moment. All the burns he suffered, as well as the internal injuries, will only continue to cause more hell, even if no more electricity is transmitted into his system. For me, it would be much more cruel and unusual to expect him to survive for a few days after that treatment. You're going to die anyway. Request denied. At 8:40 p.m., 20 minutes after the first electric shock, the third shock was administered. After this third and final time, Evans's stubborn heart finally gave in. At 8:44 p.m., doctors finally declared him dead. Spectators left their seats, some leaving with permanent mental scars after this horrifying performance. When Evans collapsed after the first electric shock, it didn't mean he was unconscious, hopefully. But both doctors carefully examined his body after each execution and found evidence that he was still conscious when he entered his third shock. This is a terrifying truth that few dare to think about. Electricity essentially completely hijacks your movements. It comprehensively takes over your muscles. They're stiff, the joints contracted, you lose control of your colon and bladder. But none of this means you were unconscious. In fact, there have been people who survived accidental electrocutions and later recalled memories from just after they believed they had completely lost consciousness. But that's probably just a shock. As time passed, they realized they could recall details of the absolute misery of hell they had endured. A 2019 study by the University of Michigan, analyzing 101 cases of severe electrical shock survivors, found that 78% of victims reported having clear memories of pain throughout the process, even though they appeared unconscious externally. Some people are truly lucky to be unconscious immediately, and some only look that way, like Evans. The electric chair is essentially nothing more than a wooden chair. They are often equipped with straps and restraining devices. It's a common misconception to think that the chair itself does all the work, but it's the electrodes that deliver the death. This method of execution requires preparation similar to a surgical procedure. Can you imagine how the absolute anxiety and panic will increase as you go through the entire process? The night before this event is when you are invited to your final meal, if your state allows it. The day of execution will be filled with periods of activity interspersed with long, drawn-out waits. It's precisely during these quiet times that your mind will race and anxiety will creep from your stomach up your throat. Your head and legs will be completely shaved. This is done to ensure that the electrode pads stick directly to your skin. Any hair, including fine hairs, can create resistance to the electric current being transmitted, prolonging this entire uncomfortable ordeal. Both day and night seem to pass agonizingly slowly. Today, executions are often carried out after midnight, making the wait a special kind of torture. Psychologists call this the executioner's waiting effect, an extreme form of psychological stress when people know exactly when and how they will die. Unlike their victims who may have died unexpectedly, death row inmates face each moment before death with brutal clarity. Finally, when the time comes, you will be called from your cell and led to the execution chamber. There, you will see the wooden chair waiting to escort you to a fiery death. You will be asked to sit down, and shortly after, leather straps will be tightened around your arms and legs. You'll realize you can barely move. Next, cold and waxy electrodes will be placed on your head and feet, sending a chilling cold current down your spine. This will be followed by a sponge soaked in salt water being placed on your head and held in place by a hat. The final piece of this gruesome puzzle is an eye patch or hood that keeps observers from seeing your face. That's because of their sobriety, not yours. When the volts start, your eyes could pop out of their sockets, and who wants to see that? You might be hoping to continue and finish things right now, but you're not there yet. You will be read your death sentence and given the opportunity to make a final statement. It's best to speak quickly. You will be granted the final rites, and finally, it's time to start the show. Now, your execution begins. The first shock is the strongest. It can range from 1600 to 2500 volts. This is meant to make you unconscious. Unfortunately, because electricity hijacks your movements, you might look unconscious even when you're not. Next is a less powerful shock intended to cause fatal damage to your heart. If you're lucky, it will succeed on the first try, and you'll be toast. If your sponge is dry or your electrodes don't have enough conductive gel, things can go very wrong. The worst-case scenario is that it catches fire. If that happens, it will be no more tolerable than being burned alive at the stake. After the first shock round, a 5-minute countdown will begin. This allows your body to cool down enough for doctors to check for signs of life. If they are present, it's time to start over. And John Lewis Evans III had to go through this hell not once, not twice, but 3 times before his heart finally gave up. 24 agonizing minutes from the first shock to the last breath. Electric shock not only brings a range of pain, but it also comes with a series of disgusting sensations. The feeling like you're about to throw up your entire heart is one of them. Electricity is very harsh on your heart muscle. Its heartbeat will become chaotic and rapid. It could fall into a dangerous state of arrhythmia before completely stopping. Of course, with the electric chair, that's the point. That means your heart rate will become uncontrolled and dangerous. This feeling creates the illusion that your heart is crawling up your esophagus only to slide back down repeatedly. It seemed to be trying to climb higher, like a panicked spider trying to escape a sink full of water. In cardiovascular medicine, this phenomenon is called ventricular tachycardia, a condition in which the heart beats so fast that it cannot pump blood effectively. The victim described it as feeling like their heart wanted to jump out of their chest, a suffocating sensation combined with primal terror. Additionally, there are a few potential underlying factors that cause oxygen deficiency, meaning not enough oxygen reaches the organs and tissues. Your own body and being burned will produce carbon monoxide if the execution goes wrong. The flames that erupt will consume the oxygen around you that your organs need. This can cause a feeling of the head swelling, getting hot, and pounding. Only in this case, your head is really getting hot. Not to mention that this amount of electricity will actually start cooking your internal organs and flesh. I can't think of anything more disturbing than smelling myself being cooked. I mean, feeling like you're being cooked isn't exactly a pleasant experience. Electric shock is a well-executed and direct attack on your nervous system. Your nerves have very little resistance to electricity, which means they will essentially lie down and sacrifice themselves as bait for the volts. This leads to blind pain and trauma. Neuroscientists estimate that the electrical stimulation simultaneously activates millions of pain nerve fibers, generating pain signals that exceed any natural experience humans can endure. That's why survivors describe it as unimaginable pain. Simple language has no words to express its intensity. Your nerves can also get a bit jumbled up sometimes. This can essentially cause them to send incorrect signals to the brainstem that have no meaning. These signals can include the sensation of cold water on the skin, intense numbness, deep itching, or the feeling of creepy little creatures crawling all over your arms and legs. Some surviving victims report a feeling of ants crawling on their skin for months after the electric shock, a persistent neurological after-effect of the injury. Electric shock can also be fatal in a very unexpected way. Severe shocks can really disrupt your brain signals. They can also directly damage brain tissue, and this can happen in all types of areas. If it accidentally damages the area that controls bodily functions like breathing will cease. The cause of death could be asphyxiation. Although when it comes to an execution, death is the goal, so I guess this isn't too shocking. Considering the average time for electrocution executions is 7 minutes, it truly shows how much pain can be endured. Of course, we know that not all 7 minutes were filled with transmitted volts, but it still sounds terrifying. 7 minutes, 420 seconds, each one filled with the suspense of waiting for the next shock, pain spreading throughout the ravaged body, and consciousness fading, but not completely gone. For people like Evans, who had to endure 24 minutes, that time must have felt like an eternity. For all those reasons, I believe this is the most painful method of execution among all modern methods. It's not because it was designed to torture, at least in theory, but because when it fails spectacularly and publicly. Unlike lethal injections, which can be administered behind a curtain, the electric chair forces witnesses to see every spark, smell every whiff of burning flesh, and confront the fact that justice is sometimes indistinguishable from brutality.